Ignition running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Why, hello there. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. News 95.5, AM 750, WSB, and no one listening on the radio is actually getting this. It's just you guys listening on the podcast. This is a special podcast episode of the Eric Erickson Show. First of all, I want to tell you guys thank you for all of your feedback. We are not going to abandon the podcast. There was unanimity among all. I mean, I think I heard from all 15,000 people. My email box melted down. Nobody wants me to get rid of the show. Now, you should know that I am on vacation and will be until January 3rd. And starting January 3rd, my show in Atlanta, if you're a regular listener to the podcast, you probably already heard this, is going to move from 5 to 7 to 4 to 6. We're also working on a national show. Hopefully we'll be able to lock that in the first quarter next year. And so there will be a national show in addition to the Atlanta show. We're not doing it separate. We're not scrapping one to do the other. I'm committed to my Atlanta audience. And my bosses have been very gracious and said if I want to go out somewhere else and do another show, go for it as long as I'm back for the afternoon, and I am glad to be back for the afternoon. So we're working on that. Please put that on your prayer list. We're trying to make that happen. It is way more difficult than I thought. In any event, the Christmas show will be out soon, but I wanted to come in because of all the news in the last 48 hours. I wanted to be able to spend some time here with General Mattis leaving and why this is a big deal, and it has everything to do with Syria. Let me back up and give you an overview of the Syrian situation. When ISIS moved into Syria, they took advantage of a political vacuum. And the political vacuum was caused by the Syrian civil war. And it is a civil war. A group of people have decided to stand up to Bashar al-Assad. He is the last Ba'athist Party member to control part of the Middle East. Saddam Hussein and the Assad family were Ba'athists. They were the successor party of the Nazis. That is a historic fact. You can look it up for yourself. They were essentially the Arab Nazi party, and they have been allowed to survive. The Russians have allied themselves with the Syrians, and we decided this was not a good thing for our interest, Israel's interest, Saudi Arabia's interest, any of our allies' interests. And so we began sending a small number of troops to help organize the rebellion against Assad. Well, as that was happening, ISIS moved into eastern Syria, and we had to fight them there because ISIS was building up in eastern Syria an area that they could organize, they could train, and they could send out terrorists around the world. We allied with the Kurds. The Kurds have a troubled history with Turkey. The southeastern part of Turkey had at one time been an autonomous province. The Turks largely wiped them out. They've been very, very nervous about northern Iraq becoming a Kurdish area. They do not like the Kurds. It is a bad history, racism, all sorts of things mixed in there. The Kurds have been our very good allies. They have stood shoulder to shoulder with us fighting ISIS. They are not Islamic radicals. This is not an Afghan situation. I've seen some people compare this to Afghanistan, where we were helping the Mujahideen and they became radicalized with Osama bin Laden. This isn't that sort of thing. The Kurds are Muslim, but they are a philosophical have a philosophical Muslim background. They are more ethnicity Muslim than an Arab than anything. I mean, they're Kurds. This is not the same situation. The Kurds have been our allies in Iraq. They have been our allies in Syria. They have been our allies for a very long time. When the president the other day decided to leave, Fox News' Jennifer Griffin reports it came after a conversation with the president of Turkey, who said they were headed into Syria to kill the Kurds and they would fight us if we didn't get out of the way. And so the president decided to get out of the way. So, in other words, the Turkish president told the American president that the Turks were coming in to kill American allies. And the American president decided to get out of the way and let it happen. Do you remember the conservative outrage when Barack Obama withdrew Patriot missile batteries and other defensive weapons systems from Poland. Conservatives were livid that we were abandoning our Polish allies. The same goes here, or at least it should, if we're intellectually honest about it. There are only 2,000 American soldiers in Syria. To the extent there are casualties, there have been less than a dozen, if that. I mean, I think there have been less than 5. Don't hold me to that, though, but it's been less than a dozen. The Kurds have done most of the work. We've been overseeing and helping. And we've been very, very successful with 2,000 troops. We have fought back against the Russians. That's been little remarked, but we have pushed back hard against the Russians. There were several encounters where the Russian troops, who actually came in pretending to be mercenaries, they tried to engage the U.S. military, and a handful of American soldiers overwhelmed and crushed a massively higher number of Russians. This has been very good for us, and we have built good relationships with the Kurds. And President Trump is abandoning them to their death. So General Mattis, Secretary Mattis, has now quit. He's quit because of Syria, and shortly thereafter, the Afghanistan situation came up. This is not good for American policy. I agree that we need to leave Afghanistan. I do. We've been there long enough. Nothing's going to change. But there are peace talks beginning to happen, or at least ceasefire talks beginning to happen. Announcing that the Americans are leaving before the peace talks begin is very much like Barack Obama giving a date certain for our withdrawal, so the Taliban just held back and waited for that date. This was not smart on the president's part to do. To say, hey, we're going to abandon the area. Now go have your peace talks with that in mind. That wasn't smart. Likewise, going on and pulling them out now without a plan to pull them out in incremental areas around the country. And the same with Syria. We've only got 2,000 troops. Pulling them out immediately sends our allies to their death, and yet again cements the fact that the Americans cannot be trusted. And this is the biggest thing. We need as many allies as we can around the world right now as China and Russia begin to exert themselves. Their view of world hegemony is different from ours. Their institutions are not democratic. Their values are not democratic. They are hostile to people of faith. They are hostile to the idea of liberty, and they are collaborating more and more increasingly. The United States is the only country that can stand up to them, and our allies are seeing our presidents, Obama and Trump, sell them out. That's not good. And if you read Secretary Mattis's letter, he is very adamant that we owe an obligation to the world as essentially the leader of the free world to stand and lead on these issues because no one else can at a time where the free world needs that leadership, and we're not doing it. When that anonymous op-ed came out in the New York Times a while back, Nikki Haley responded to it, and it actually got her in trouble at the White House. It was underreported, but the White House did not like Nikki Haley's op-ed. They really didn't, even though I thought it was great. They did not like it, and they did not like it because they thought that Nikki Haley was essentially trying to make it about her. The president is always upset with attention. There's actually a report out. I'm recording this on December 21st at 10 a.m. There's a report out today that the president is already upset with Mick Mulvaney because there have been several press reports out that 2 years ago, Mick Mulvaney called the president a terrible person. And so before Mulvaney already begins chief of staff job, the president already is upset with him. They're upset with Nikki Haley. They think she stole the president's limelight. This is one of the problems, and I think it's a problem that conservative critics had of the Obama administration, that when you're an A person, you surround yourself with A's. When you're a B person, you surround yourself with C's and D's. President Trump has, in many cases, surrounded himself with C and D people, except at cabinet-level positions, because he knew to get them through Congress, he needed to have people at the top of the game. So he put them there, but over time, he has largely begun to ignore them. He began to ignore Mattis. There are reports out he's beginning to ignore Pompeo. He's ignoring a number of his other cabinet secretaries. He's been ignoring Steve Mnuchin. He ignored Gary Cohn. He ignored a bunch of people who were, whether you agreed with them or not, I'm not a big Gary Cohn fan, but he was A-list, competent, and shouldn't have been ignored. And now the president apparently beginning the process of ignoring Mick Mulvaney. This is not good for his presidency. It's not good for the country. And in any event, going back to the Nikki Haley op-ed, one of the things she said is instead of leaking, instead of whispering, instead of going to the New York Times, you should just resign. Just resign. And I think she was right. Because I blame that New York Times op-ed for a lot of the president's behavior over the last couple of months in the run-up to the Syria situation. The president read that New York Times op-ed, and it confirmed to him that there is an internal cabal of people inside the administration working against him. And if there's an internal cabal of people in the White House working against him, the thing he does not want to do is tell them what he plans on doing so that they can undermine him. If he's adamant he wants to get out of Syria, he can't tell these people because he thinks it'll never get done, so he's got to jump to Twitter and announce it. Because of that op-ed. Now, there is a fair point that when things don't work for the president democratically, he turns to the military and does things militarily. And I do think there's an issue there. We saw that with North Korea and other things. The North Korea situation, by the way, not going well. The North Koreans now saying they will go no further until we completely withdraw from the Korean Peninsula. And they did that after seeing the United States begin withdrawing from Syria and Afghanistan, or the president's orders. All of that in North Korea is because of Syria and Afghanistan. Seeing the president wants to withdraw from there, they're trying to push him to withdraw from South Korea. They know he wants to. But a lot of this comes from the president's growing paranoia that no one is in the White House helping him, and that New York Times op-ed had a lot to do with it. So here's the good thing about Nikki Haley's op-ed was she said, don't do that, don't leak, don't whisper, don't try to ruin the presidency, just resign. If you disagree, carry out the president's orders, push back where you can, debate him. She's found that he's willing to listen, and if he doesn't listen, resign. Fair point. And that's what Secretary Mattis did. Secretary Mattis went to the White House, tried to convince the president to change his mind, and when the president refused to change his mind, Secretary Mattis resigned. That's the way it should have been done. But it also sends up a big red flag in his resignation letter, that he fundamentally disagrees with the way the president is going forward. The president must not have read Secretary Mattis's letter of resignation when he was tweeting praise for him, because Mattis's resignation letter was not flattering towards the president. But this is the way that others in the administration should behave. If they disagree with the president, whoever that president is, they should resign. Now, all that being said, there is something good and I think worthwhile and praiseworthy here that's happened. You know, I put up a tweet last night. Got all the Trump supporters very worked up and said we should be very thankful we live in this country, or we probably would be talking about a military coup right now. And that wasn't my endorsement of a coup, as some of them were claiming. It is I do not recall, even during the Obama administration, that the level of complaint from enlisted to officer. NBC News was reporting from its foreign policy correspondent, who actually is a decent correspondent, unlike many of the reporters they have. He's not a partisan activist. And his reporting was echoed by Jennifer Griffin from Fox News and others, that down to the enlisted soldiers on the ground in Syria, to Central Command, to the Joint Chiefs, to other civilian appointees within the Pentagon, people were livid with the president's decision. The soldiers in Syria were horrified that they were having to tell the Kurds that they're being abandoned. The general in charge of Central Command said he felt like he was punched in the gut. Others very livid. We are very, very blessed to live in the United States, which is the best country that ever was. Because if we didn't, the level of outrage we would be talking about is the military plotting something. What makes this country so awesome is that there's that level of vehemence. I cannot recall that level of leaking and venting to reporters from enlisted and officers over a decision of the president prior to now. And they will all carry out his order. Even though they so adamantly disagree with it, they will carry out his order. And that is what makes this a wonderful nation. The military can disagree with the president, but have such respect for the civilian authorities and Constitution that they will carry out the orders they disagree with. And we should all be very thankful we live in this country. Despite all of the discombobulation these past few years and whatnot, we have a situation where we still have a stable democracy. You would never know that from the reporting in the media, but we do. And we should be thankful for that. We should be thankful for a lot of things as we move from Thanksgiving into this Christmas season. The Mattis situation is a red flag for this administration. It is a red flag for moving forward. And this is the first time I'm really started to think, will the president finish his first term? And I haven't really said that before. I've never really thought it. I mean, others have speculated on it. I just haven't. But seeing the way he's behaving, I've got friends of mine, the number of friends of mine who in the last 24 hours have said, maybe the Russians really do have something. Maybe the P-tape is real, have skyrocketed. Because when you think about it, in the last 48 hours, the only people happy with the president are the Russians. He got rid of the sanctions on the Russian oligarchs, despite his advisors telling him not to. And he's withdrawn from Syria, despite his advisors telling him not to. The only people who benefit from those decisions, the Russians. And people are like, hey, maybe they really do have something on him. And I don't think that's the case. But I'm starting to wonder if he's just trying to wrap things up and be done. And I've never really thought that before, but this feels like the end of a presidency when the presidents start pardoning people they want to pardon before they leave. And of course, he started that way with Mike Flynn and whatnot, Dinesh D'Souza. But this seems different. This doesn't seem stable, and it doesn't seem like it can last. But if I was a betting man, I would bet odds on an election in 2020 with President Trump as the Republican nominee. This is just a weird situation, though. We should certainly be in prayer for the country, for the president and our leaders right now. And we'll see where it goes. If anything shapes up over the next few days, although I'm on vacation, I have access to my microphone and mixer. I can record a podcast. Also, the Christmas podcast will be up over the weekend. It'll be airing live on WSB over the weekend on Monday and Tuesday as well, with the music. If you're listening to a podcast, some of it has to be stripped out for streaming purposes. But nonetheless, there you go. You guys have a great, great weekend and a very Merry Christmas. If I don't talk to you before January 3rd, my show will start airing live at 4 p.m. January 3rd, and we'll get the podcast out then in the evenings a little bit earlier. Y'all have a wonderful holiday season and Happy New Year.